Okay, welcome everybody. Good afternoon, to the latest in this series of webinars organised by the Foundation for Integrated Transport, affectionately known by its acronym FIT. This is the fifth in the series of webinars where we take the time to showcase the incredible work of the various organisations that we have funded through the work of the Foundation. My name is Mark Frost. I'm a trustee of the Foundation and have been for the last 3 years. My background is as a chief officer responsible for transport and environmental strategy in the local government sector. However, in the last few years, I've been running my own business, providing support and advice back mainly to public sector clients in that space. Today's webinar is about positive local campaigning, and I have to say, in my work and over my career, I've been on the end of some really excellent positive local campaigning, and also some not so positive local campaigning, including from time to time the odd death threat. So it's always good, I think, to take a moment to consider how we can raise the quality of the debate. And how we can make sure that we're engaging with all people, public and public servants as well, in the most constructive and effective way possible. And I think we'll definitely hear that at some point today. I'm conscious that we've got a large number of people on the call, a couple of hundred people registered. So I just want to take a moment to say a little bit more about the work of the Foundation. And I have a PowerPoint to share on this. It's perhaps particularly appropriate actually to share this year because this is our 10th anniversary year. We were founded in 2014 by the late Dr. Simon Norton, who was a world-class mathematician and renowned transport campaigner. Actually, this year is added poignancy for the Foundation as it's the 5th anniversary of Simon's sad death in February 2019. Unfortunately, I didn't have the luck to meet Simon in person, but I've heard a huge amount about him from a number of people that were massively influenced by him. Simon's main drive was this idea, I think, powerful idea that humans have a right to live their life to the full, to access all services and opportunities that one would wish to access without the necessity of having a car, and that, in his view, was a human right. Following on from that people should have the right to be able to travel with the minimum impact on other people's lives and importantly the environment. In order to be able to achieve that public transport should be integrated and safe, and that walking and cycling, active travel as we call it now, is also integrated and of high quality infrastructure. And all of this should be done in a way that removes barriers to injustice and inequality, and transport and access to transport is a key barrier for many, particularly those on lower incomes and those with disabilities. So those are sort of the objectives. So how do we actually do that? Our strategic priorities, as set by the board, are looking at ways that we can change the public attitude to the car, how we can transform bus services in the UK. And I think we find ourselves slightly in vogue there. I think most political parties are centred on this idea of the bus as being a powerful enabler of a more sustainable future and more equitable future. Looking at some particular projects around sustainable travel to leisure destinations, generally improving the availability of public transport as a human right. We've got some particular projects looking at new and existing developments and how to make those more sustainable. We support a large number of grassroots community groups who are either supporting sustainable transport options or indeed looking to object or oppose unsustainable solutions. We have some work around coaches. In particular, we think that there's a huge role to play for the coach market in delivering this more sustainable future. And generally, we look to try and raise the profile of environmental transport, sustainable environmental campaigning, which traditionally has been a bit of a Cinderella cause, I think, in the environmental movement. So how do we do that? Well, we have a range of programs, the main ones being our grant program, of which the people that you'll hear from shortly have been recipients of. We have a main grants program, which is an award of typically between £5,000 and £30,000. We have a small grants program for those really local grassroots campaigns in this space. We run a fellowship programme, and we are joined indeed by one of our fellows, Roger Harrobin, today, but we've had a large number of practitioners and academics who have gone through that programme and helped us to provide evidence base for how to achieve the objectives of the Trust. And we also have an investment fund that invests in a number of projects on a commercial basis. And we have, over the last 10 years, and particularly in the last 5 years, supported a huge number of different organisations. And you can see there's a wide range there, the diverse range of both national organisations looking to influence the discussion at the UK level or even internationally, right the way down to very grassroots levels, such as what we'll hear from today. So hopefully that gives you a little bit more information about stop my sharing, what we do at the foundation. So to business. So I think most people on the call would probably say that there's quite a lot of discussion about transport and transport campaigning at the moment. It's definitely been the case over the last few years, particularly since the pandemic, that this is a cause that has been significantly more discussed, a much higher profile than perhaps was previously the case. And I think particularly around the idea of changing the allocation of different road space for different users, putting in place restrictions to the use of the car, particularly low traffic neighbourhoods, and influencing the use of private vehicles through such things as low traffic neighbourhoods and other measures to restrict car use. We know that often, not always, but often, the silent majority are in favour of these measures. However, there is often a vocal minority of people that are impacted, and often genuinely impacted, but though that vocal minority can have a disproportionate impact on the political decision-making process. And we at FIT believe that there is therefore a necessity to have a counterpoint to that view, and that is why we fund the sort of organisations that you're going to hear from shortly. We've got two campaigns here today from the university towns of Oxford and Cambridge. These are two groups that we have funded that we think have been particularly effective, and there's lots of lessons learned, we believe, for the wider UK movement in this space. However, we are conscious that Oxford and Cambridge are, can be considered to be fairly unique. So it might be interesting to pick up on the discussion about, to the extent to which these are transferable lessons, and where towns maybe that are starting the journey at a slightly different place, earlier point maybe, might be able to learn from this experience. Way that we're going to work this is going to have two presentations, going to go on for about sort of 45 minutes, 50 minutes maybe, showcasing the sort of experience from Oxford and Cambridge. We're going to have a panel discussion, and I'm joined by two further panelists, Roger Harrobin and Rebecca Willis, who I'll introduce when we get to that point. And then we'll also be taking some questions from the floor as well. So you'll be able to contribute within the conversation through the YouTube portal, and our excellent events coordinator, Brogan, will post some stuff for the panel in the chat, and we'll try and pick up as many of those as we can. Look, I would say, and being in local government, I've seen both sides of this discussion, that there are strong views on these sorts of topics. This is intended to be a place which is safe for people to be able to express their views, and we certainly won't take kindly to any negative comments in the chat. And if that does persist, then there would be blocking from that. I'm really hopeful that that won't be the case, and we can all engage with this, irrespective of our views, really, in a professional and courteous way. And I thank you in advance for doing that. Okay, right. After that very long preamble, straight into the discussion. So we're going to start with Cambridge, and I'm delighted to introduce. I'd be delighted to hand over in a second to Sarah Hughes and Roxanne Deboo. So Sarah is a relatively new campaigner working for the Cambridge Sustainable Travel Alliance, who has been funded by the Foundation for Integrated Transport. And I've got here that she relishes the opportunity to bring together those advocating for different modes of green travel and enjoys pushing for positive change in the county where she's lived since childhood. Roxanne is the CEO of CamCycle, so one of the members of the Cambridge Sustainable Travel Alliance. who has really led the transformation of CamCycle over the last few years, and has as a consequence led to it growing significantly in both size and its influence as an organisation. I would say, and I would in your bio, but I would agree, Roxanne, that it is one of the most successful cycle advocacy groups in the UK, and is now looking to grow its influence over the Cambridgeshire region. Roxanne was recognised in 2017 as one of the Cycling UK's 100 Women in Cycling. She's a CLAW Leadership Fellow and an alumna of the University of Amsterdam Urban Cycling Institute. So without further ado, I will be quiet and I'll hand over to Sarah and Roxanne. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Mark. A real pleasure to be here, and I must just start by expressing so much gratitude for the Foundation for Integrated Transport. I will say not only for their support for this campaign, but more generally being just one of the best funders out there. I hope other funders look to FIT to really see how funders can help charities have a real impact, and without taking too much of the adding too much workload. That's a whole other thing for another time, but real gratitude to FIT. I can see Zahura agreeing with me there. Right, so you've done such a lovely job of introducing myself and Sarah. I probably don't need to say much more. And I'll explain our journey and how we went from CamCycle to the CSTA, and then Sarah will hand over and talk about all the fantastic work that she has done on this campaign. So, Sarah, if you could pop our slides up, I'll get cracking. So, Mark mentioned CamCycle being one of the most successful cycling campaigns in the UK, and we're not just saying that to brag, but it's I think it's really important to set the scene about where this all started. So, we're here today to talk about the benefits of a positive communication about a sustainable travel zone, and how we did that through the Cambridgeshire Sustainable Travel Alliance. And so this really started in October 2022 when, well, we had an idea that something was brewing. Very suddenly found out that a congestion charge proposal, or a road user charge, I should say, proposal was coming for our region. I think we had days, the papers came out, consultation is on its way. And so what was the proposal? It was called Making Connections. It was about bringing in a road user charge, and that would fund a transformation of walking and cycling and public transport by creating quite a large sustainable travel zone around the Cambridge city. And there would be a £5 charge with various alterations based on your circumstances to drive within that zone, and that would go to pay for walking and cycling improvements and public transport. So CamCycle clearly saw that this would benefit our objectives around better cycling, but also that this was pushing a bit beyond CamCycle's remit. And we were looking to, okay, who's going to take the baton here? Who's going to lead this campaign? And well, CamCycle was sort of the best placed organization in terms of those resources and influence that we've talked about. But we felt that it was still pushing. So we went and looked for some friends, and we found them in our local Living Streets group and in the Cambridge area bus users group. And we said, we need to get together and do this together, because CamCycle can't just speak on buses, can't speak on walking. We've got our views, but we need to make sure we're being challenged on those, and we need to be presenting something balanced. So, with CamCycle's foundation, we were able to bring that together, bring our Living Streets and the bus users group alongside. So we got together and we got a very quick application into the FIT for £2,000 to get the ball rolling. And through that, we were then able to start launching the start of our campaign. So this is where we started to reach out to other memberships, other organizations to join our membership. And so far we've got 31 member organizations. And this was to show that broad support that a sustainable travel zone would have. This isn't just about cycling or walking. This is about the environment. This is about clean air. This is about children getting to school safely. This is good for local businesses. So we just sought to get as many allies as we could, and we're continuing to grow that. And I think that was very important to show to give some weight and credibility to our alliance as quickly as possible. So with these members, we had to get going and work out, well, what is this about? What is the messaging? And when you're in an alliance, that doesn't happen overnight, because you need to find the compromises. You can't just be reactive here. We wanted to be really sound in the arguments we put forward, but that meant there was a bit of a gap where the very easy message of no was able to get out really strong, really quickly. You didn't need to think that through, just say no to everything. And what we found was that all that came out of this was, no, it's going to be £5. And there was absolutely any message about the positive sides to this was just drowned out. Nobody was talking about, oh, but what about the walking we can invest in? What about the cycling? What about the public transport? That was just really not being heard at all in this big no message. So we knew our alliance had to really try and counter that and make sure that the positive sides of this was being heard. And so then around this time, our larger application to the FIT came through, and we were able to employ Sarah and really ramp up the work that we were doing. And this is where we really started to focus on what are those positives. Let's make sure that's getting in front of people. And I guess you could say this is something that for the local authority and anyone who knows Cambridge will know it's very complicated, our governance structure here. It seemed very hard for them to get that message in front of people, particularly in the early days. And this is where it's phenomenal what a grassroots effort did to get this message, the positive benefits in front of audiences, particularly ones that may not have heard it before. But this is where I think it is fair that I hand this over to Sarah, where she can really talk about the work that she did such a great job delivering. Yep, where's Sarah? Sarah, over to you.
That's better. Sorry, slight problem unmuting there. So as Roxanne has just said, move back to the right slide. We wanted to run a campaign that communicated the positives of the Making Connections proposals. So first of all, while the public consultation was ongoing, we ran what we called our If Not Now, Then When campaign. And this was in collaboration between the Cambridgeshire Sustainable Travel Alliance and Fusion Media. Fusion Media are a marketing agency that specialise in active travel. So through our campaign, we wanted to encourage people to imagine a better future with sustainable travel. And so therefore we focused on the benefits of the proposal. So if you look at this wine red coloured poster on the left, we're talking about safe walking, cycling routes, reliable buses, and a positive future for everyone. At the same time, we thought it was really important to stress to people the urgency of getting involved in this campaign. This was a truly transformational moment for Cambridgeshire. So we didn't shy away from talking about climate change. We didn't shy away from talking about the pretty terrible bus cuts our region was experiencing. We wanted to get across to people that it was important more than ever to fill in this particular consultation survey. And to get the message across, we used really brightly coloured attention-grabbing posters with big, bold graphics, as you can see just here. And we also focused on the benefits to families and young children. So you can see a photo there on the right-hand side that's attempting to get the message across to families. Talking a bit more about young people, we had identified that we thought young people were the group most likely to be supportive of the Sustainable Travel Zone road charge. So we felt that we really needed to reach out to them in our campaign. And we did this in various ways. So we filmed interviews with supportive young people and then distributed those on our YouTube channel and also through all our social media channels. And we also worked in collaboration with Fusion Media with an influencer to get the message across to young people on TikTok. And we distributed an awful lot of leaflets at places where we knew that young people would be. So we had volunteers starting conversations, handing out leaflets at leisure parks, at bus stops, and near sixth form colleges. And we feel that this really made a difference. So there was the largest response from the under-25s ever to a Greater Cambridge Partnership, a GCP consultation. The GCP with the organisation running these consultations. And 11% of survey respondents were under 25, which we think was really a good result. They're still underrepresented, but much less underrepresented than I think they might have been had those efforts not been made to reach them and encourage them to fill in the consultation survey. Going back to positive campaigning, a large demonstration was held against the Sustainable Travel Zone road charge. We felt it was really important that there was a counter event, an event that showed the level of support for the Making Connections proposals and all the benefits that they would bring. So we partnered with Alliance member organisation Cambridge Parents for Sustainable Travel to put on an event where families and young people could show their support for the proposals. And so going with the young children theme, it was a Wheels on the Bus walking march, where we all said, let's say yes to better buses. So here's the start of the march, lots of families and young people involved, a lovely banner at the front. This was a really positive occasion, and the participants brought some absolutely wonderful placards. So I've got some examples for you here. Lovely positive campaign slogans. We've got say yes to the bus. We've got build back busser, bird song, not car fumes. So getting across a really positive message about what the proposals could bring to Cambridgeshire. After the public consultation closed, we still wanted to continue our positive campaigning, but we needed to do it in a slightly different way. So our immediate priority was to change the narrative. Just around the point that the public consultation was closing, local South Cambridgeshire Conservative MP Anthony Brown released the results of a survey he had carried out, and he said that nearly 90% of the respondents to his survey opposed the Sustainable Travel Zone road charge. We thought that was an extremely high number, and we thought that it was highly likely his survey was not representative. So we wanted to commission a representative poll to look at what those numbers actually were. So we partnered with Fusion Media and commissioned a YouGov poll, and you can see the results of this YouGov poll in the bottom right-hand corner here. It wasn't that nearly 90% in our poll that were opposed, it was 59%, so a much smaller number, 39% in support. So I think by using that poll, we were able to change the narrative a bit. The other way in which we needed to campaign in 2023, what a lot of our focus was on emboldening politicians. So our local politicians, local councillors, they were the people discussing the Sustainable Travel Zone road charge at public meetings. They were the people that were going to be making decisions on it, but they're also extremely busy people with an awful lot of issues on their plate. They don't only deal with sustainable transport, their constituents bring them all sorts of problems on a daily basis. So we felt that there was a need to educate and inform them about the proposals. So we supplied them with briefing papers that had succinct, high quality and relevant information so that they could better understand the issues involved. And also we gave them information examples they could use should they wish to formulate arguments in support of the Sustainable Travel Zone proposals. We found this was a really effective way of communicating with councillors and building relationships with them. We heard the points that we made in the briefing papers discussed and raised in council meetings, and we also received personal thanks from councillors for the information we provided. So we know that had an impact. To embolden local councillors, we also made sure we showed up at public meetings and asked public questions in support of the proposals and encouraged as many of our local member organisations as possible to do the same. I think that was always already also a very effective way of showing support. So what were the impacts of our positive campaign? Well, I've already mentioned that we had the largest response to a GCP consultation ever from young people. So I think that was something on which we really made a difference. And I've mentioned that the points from the briefing papers were used by politicians. I think the overall outcome of the Making Connections consultation is also worth noting. So 34% of respondents to the public survey were in favour of the Sustainable Travel Zone. That might not have been the 40% or the 50% that we were looking for, but I think that was still a good number. And without a unified, strong, positive campaign, I think maybe the number wouldn't quite have been that large. I think we achieved better balance in the narrative. We ensured, for example, on radio programmes, that people mentioned buses as well as the road charge in the media. Whenever the sustainable travel zone was discussed, we found it was quite common that there were two pictures accompanying the article, one of the march against the sustainable travel zone and one of the Better Buses march. So I think there we're bringing buses into the conversation, bringing the benefits of the proposals into the conversation. Running a strong positive campaign enabled those who were supportive of the proposals to speak up. I think it would have been very lonely without so many voices in the media speaking up for the proposals. And I think we've also moved the window. So the general public, many people may not actually have been in support of the sustainable travel zone road charge, but they're now taking a lot more interest in demand management and sustainable travel and ways to solve Cambridgeshire's problems. So people are now open to talking about what alternatives would be acceptable for them. So we're hearing workplace parking levy discussed in the media, circulation plan. I don't think that would have been the case 2 years ago. However, as I think many of you will be aware, the decision was taken last September not to progress the sustainable travel zone road charge proposals. In late August, some revised plans were released, which we think would have been capable of getting widespread support. But alas, due to some political manoeuvrings before these revised plans could be discussed in public council meetings, several key politicians said that they couldn't support the proposals. And so their proposals weren't discussed at the public meetings. And in late September, a decision was taken by the Greater Cambridge Partnership, the organisation progressing the proposals, to effectively shelve them and not to develop them any further. And I'm going to hand over back to Roxanne, who's going to talk about the longer term impacts.
Thank you, Sarah. Sarah was phenomenal throughout this campaign, and the quality of your work, Sarah, has really, really helped move this forward. And the work of the Alliance has certainly had longer term impacts on what we do next. So we still have this alliance. We're still working together. We've collaborated on a number of subsequent consultations around, and we're working right now on proposals for the bus franchising that are coming forward, for mayoral precepts to put more money into buses. So really able to show that this isn't buses or bikes or walking. This is actually about all of us coming together for integrated transport solutions that really just help people have choices to get out of the car. So this collaborative work is really great. And we've really seen the impact of the respect that our organizations have individually and collectively with decision makers and other stakeholders in Cambridgeshire, and actually beyond our city as well. You know, what we've done here has really got the attention of people. The usefulness of the work that we did, Sarah's briefing papers in particular, has really shown us to be quality thought leaders that people reach out to now. And I think we're taken very seriously by our decision makers. They also saw the impact of our campaigning efforts and know that we need to be engaged with in ways that we perhaps haven't had before. So, you know, the impacts of this are ongoing, and we're preparing for what's next, because this window has moved forward. Everyone agrees something needs to be done, and we're getting closer to working out what that is. So the Alliance is there and waiting for the opportunity to keep moving this forward. So I'll just reiterate a huge thank you to the Foundation for Integrated Transport for giving us the resources we needed to make this happen. It's really changed the landscape here. Thank you.
Excellent. Thank you both. And you know, I think thanks you as well for all the hard work. You know, sometimes it's easy to agree a grant. It's a little bit more difficult to you know, to do the sort of action that you've just been doing. So, you know, thank you, definitely going both ways. Okay, hopefully those on the call found that useful. I certainly learned a lot there. We're going to go straight into our second presentation now, so save your save your questions. So from Cambridge to Oxford, I should point out the order is in no way reflecting Fit's preference either way for one city or the other. It was mutually agreed. We move now to hear from Zahara Plummer, who's campaign director at Oxfordshire Livable Streets. Zahara's been with Oxfordshire Living Streets just a year or so, actually, and helping really to very much to spearhead the work of the organisation around the proposals to improve the traffic and transport situation in the city. OLS is small but punches above its weight. I would also agree with that one in your bio there, Zahara. And it engages with a wide range of communities and workplaces to help try and build what they refer to as a social mandate for change. Zahara moved to Oxford in 2015 and has lived in many parts of the city, but most happily along the Thames. So Zahara, please hand over and let us know what you've been up to.
Hi, hello everyone. I'm Zahara, as Mark said, from OLS. And so just to give you a little bit of background and context, Oxfordshire Livable Streets has been going for about 4 years, and it was very much a voluntary group of people who just wanted to see some change in the city and wanted to put pressure on the council to bring in LTNs and a circulation plan. There was a circulation plan that kind of was in existence in the political kind of sphere, but was never committed to, and they want to put pressure on that. And so I'm the first employee of OLS. I came in just at the very end of 2022, very, very end of it. And we've since hired a part-time person who has changed my life, but we are very, very small. So we are very, very much at the beginning. So much less developed organisationally than Cam Cycle. And but we are quite also a split, a kind of split ecosystem in Oxford. We have like quite a lot of different actors, which I'll talk a little bit about in my presentation. But I just wanted to give you that kind of sort of context first. So I'll just talk to you through, can everyone see my screen? I assume everyone can see my screen. No one's saying no. So I'm going to talk to you today about what's going on in Oxford, and then our approach and like our learning that we've done here, and then some kind of general wisdom and thoughts that didn't really fit into any other brackets. So this is the Central Oxfordshire Travel Plan, and this is the plan that we have for reducing car journey reduction, cleaning up air, doing all kinds of things. It contains 21 measures, so it's not just about demand reduction, but all kinds of things: parking, loads and loads of brilliant things, freight consolidation, mobility hubs, loads of fantastic things. But the four kind of famous measures, famous in Oxford and maybe with some of you guys, are low traffic neighbourhoods, which are in and permanently they're done, but I would say they're not secure. They're not politically secure yet. The traffic filters, which is a circulation plan, and that's coming in November this year, 2024. And this is essentially 6 ANPR cameras around the city on the key arterial roads. That's on the pink in my slide, and that will essentially really reduce the ability of people to drive across the city. So they have to go around the ring road if they're doing a longer journey, or they'll have to find another way of going around, except there are many other ways for them to get around as well. So I'm going to get onto that. But it is a circulation plan, not a congestion charge. The passes are free. We have also a ZEZ, so that's the dark blue in the centre. And so this is a zero emission zone. It's already kind of in the very, very centre of the city, like 4 streets. But it's going to be expanded massively. It's not really a zero emission zone. It's a pay for your tailpipe emissions zone. But it does do a lot to clean up the air, and it will also reduce congestion, but it will also raise revenue. That's one of the key things it will do, ring-fenced revenue. And then finally, the kind of jewel in the crown in many ways is the workplace parking levy, which is in the plan, and we have got budget committed to taking that forward. But it will be politically quite challenging, and I think it's towards the end of the sequence. So, and it takes quite a long time to get it in for a whole variety of reasons. So we are in a great and strange situation where we have real political courage in Oxfordshire. Sorry, it's the County Council Oxfordshire that is doing this, and it works with the City of Oxford as well. We have a kind of split authority. We don't have a unitary authority. And so OLS is campaigning in favour of the adopted plan. So we're kind of, we got past the point, I suppose, of Cambridge, and the plan is in place and committed to and happening. But we've got a serious amount of resistance. So the thing that we're wrestling with is the political pushback and the social media and polarisation and all of that kind of pushback. So it's a different way of campaigning for than when you're trying to change decision makers' minds, or you're trying to change the minds of people to get something in. And it has been really, really painful. I don't know how much of you would have been following what's going on in Oxford, but we had this rally in February. We've had Jordan Peterson weighing in with his views on Oxfordshire's traffic policies. We've got an extremely hostile local press. I mean, journalism to the point of it's very, very, very poor. And we kind of, you know, it's basically associated 15-minute cities with the traffic filter. So it's going to be a climate lockdown. You're going to be kept in your zone. That's the kind of general narrative. And the thing that is like, I cannot stress enough, is that the local authority is they just are not prepared for this one. They're just not equipped. Like, they cannot react in a way that is needed. So they're very much on the back foot. You know, the comms team is incredibly demoralised. They've got very little ability to move quickly and nimbly. And so we felt that that was the real gap that was missing, and that was the thing that was like that we could work on, because we could move so much faster than the local authorities, because we know the commitment is there, and we know the officers are beavering away on it, and we know that the politicians are willing to like stick their heads above the parapet, really. So this is just a really rough timeline, just so you have a sense of what's coming. So the filter registration, that's the point at which people can start registering for their passes and things, will open in this summer. So I'm expecting from this summer onwards to be really quite a difficult period. I think we will see a concerted campaign against us, against us, I mean like OLS, the county, the plan, in the same way that ULEZ had this, like, had that, you know, that very, very concerted campaign on against the expansion. So it's a very key point. Then the filters get switched on in November, also a very, very key point. But I think it's actually that pre-switch on point that's going to be really tricky as well. Then the traffic filters will run on something called an ETRO, Experimental Traffic Regulation Order. And then they will be decided to be made permanent or not. And everything from May 2025 is with a question mark. So then we will see, hopefully, our ZEZ will get expanded from that point onwards, and then they'll give some time for that to settle in, and then the workplace parking levy. This is my guess at a timetable from what I've gleaned from officers and councillors and looking at reports and things. It's not an announced timeline, so please don't that's why I've got that title there. But what they've decided not to do is do a shock thing. So what they could have done is bring in all three measures at once, and they decided very much not to do that because they felt it was logistically too challenging. They did not have the officer resource. But I think it's worth considering, like, is that actually a better way of doing it or not? Yeah, I haven't got time to discuss all of that. But the thing that's really key is that we've got an awful lot of elections. So for a variety of reasons, Oxfordshire has a lot of elections because we have the two authorities and because the city, the way their elections run. So every single year we've got elections, apart from the year in which I think they should bring in the WPL. And the key one is May 25. So everything after that, it could be off the table. Like if the brave politicians who are currently sticking to it get voted out, then it could potentially go the way of Cambridge, or it will get watered down. I think it actually can't particularly disappear for a range of reasons to do with the bus companies and the guidance it's already written into. But the point for everybody here is that there are particular nerve points, and they are around elections. Like, they absolutely, like, we can see it already in the lead up to the city council here, and support dips when the details emerge. So my strong advice is to build that big positive vision of where you can go and how change is possible, and how people, you know, ordinary stories of people changing their journeys, but not getting into the weeds of how the plan is actually going to work until you really, really have to. Because I think once the details emerge, people start to panic. And so think about how long you want that period to last for. And then the other thing is, things take a really, really long time. Like, I thought this was going to be like a sprint, because I'm great at sprints. I was like, traffic filters are going in, well, we can get that going. And of course, it is nothing like that. So that was kind of naive of me. So quickly, our approach and learning. So we build credibility with the council a lot, and that's something you can definitely do even before you've got a plan in place. So we do formal addresses, we do petitions, we do build our membership, we contribute to many, many consultations and engagements, and that is a really vital step, that we had that credibility before I came in through the voluntary group. And it's very important to develop relationships with the officers as well, because remember, elected members come and go, whereas officers really do tend to stay, and they are like, somebody talked to me about, like, they're like the digger underneath digging the Channel Tunnel or digging Crossrail. Like, they're this enormous machine. It's very, very difficult to get it started, but it's very, very difficult to get it stopped. And a tiny little shift in direction will lead to a big shift in the long term. So if you think of like officers like that, they just kind of keep on going, or that certainly the ones in Oxford are, they kind of blink us on, and that's to a disadvantage sometimes. We do want them to change, like the way they design cycle infrastructure, but it's also to our advantage when it's something that we are in favour of. And so we do all kinds of coffees and lunches. We do have a very close relationship with the current administration. This is an example of a cute thing, but we did a YouGov poll, and I iced the results of the YouGov poll on a cake and delivered it to a cabinet member's house after a particularly bad day, and did little cute flags. And I think it kind of, that morale boosting stuff really does matter. Like, it sounds silly, but like, he remembered that. Like, it was absolutely like, it can be really cute, nice to do cute things. And another thing you can get going on when you don't necessarily have a plan adopted by your administration is uniting the pros. It's one of the most important things I think you can possibly do. So we've got tons of us here, and we do have a kind of coalition, a little bit like the Sustainable Travel Zone Coalition. It's called COSAT, Coalition for Healthy Streets and Active Travel. It's a bit bubbly. It's very bubbly, you know, people who will agree with each other. But the thing that I really want to stress there is that we are very liberal in our membership. We invite green groups in. We absolutely, buses are active travel for sure. You have to walk to the bus stop. You sometimes have to stand on the bus. We try to always remember that we have so much more in common than we have like against us. So you know, compared to that, so we really don't try to like we should try to ride out the kind of issues around pedestrians and cyclists like not getting on, and just remember that the things that we all want to get car journey reduction. So that's a really key thing. I'm going to flip through these next slides because I thought I'd have a bit more time, and I can come back to them if someone says to me, oh, they look really, really interesting. So one of the most useful things we did is a YouGov survey of Oxford residents on traffic measures. And so we paid about £1,800 for it. It was one of the most useful bits of money we've ever spent. And it came back saying that 2 to 1 people are largely in favour. So it varies slightly across the different measures, but it was a resounding 2 to 1. And it was enough of confidence, the range of confidence was enough that it was very, very helpful. And it really calmed nerves at County Hall when they were just voting through the plan. But at the same time, you have to remember that this is Oxford, not Oxfordshire, and this is a county council. And so that's something that I keep talking to the pros about all of the time, that like, we're in an Oxford bubble, and it is very different in Oxfordshire. It's very much more rural, and it's very much more kind of traditional. This was before a lot of polarisation, and we've had an awful lot, and it is still hypothetical. So people are in favour of things until it's like, you're not going to be able to drive down your street, and then we know from climate data that support does drop off. So yeah, bear those things in mind. So we believe there's a need to build a kind of social mandate for this. And by a social mandate, I mean kind of informed understanding. I don't mean like informed consent across everybody, but we feel like what is missing is this big positive vision of what's going to happen and why we need to get there, and like why we can't all keep driving. And this is largely related to population growth in the county, which Cambridge is also experiencing, and many parts of the southeast are also experiencing. So we always try to talk to mainstream values and get out of our bubble as much as possible, and do this in ways with language which is kind of compromising and language which is really simple. And we try to always use narratives that kind of feel right in people's bones for the majority of people. So we talk about stories. We try to turn like information into knowledge, and we really try to build trusted messengers. So that's ordinary people who are not middle class white people who cycle, who have changed their journeys or do different things. And so I'm kind of nurturing those for like a long time, and getting people to commit to doing something on social media is really hard. And we do this kind of positive, realistic vision. And it's not about winning everybody over, and it's not spending ages making the perfect policy. But you really do have to start before the details are announced. So a lot of people think that if you're doing the kind of building the informed understanding, it's about like getting everyone to agree. It's not. It's just about aiming for that middle mainstream. I really cannot emphasize enough how amazing actclimatelabs.org are. Just go to their website and read. Join us. You have to join as a member, which means you just have to sign up with the email address. They are absolutely outstanding. They've got fantastic comms, fantastic stuff on narratives. They've got a whole briefing on transport and crisis communications and all kinds of things. Like, I cannot emphasize enough how fantastic they are. And there's a bunch of things. I think you'll get these slides afterwards. So yeah, try to turn information into stories, understanding and stories. So we take this information, which is on the County Council's website about how people will drive, and we turn it into a story. So information alone will not change behaviour. The number of campaigners in Oxford who I meet who are like, we need a website to tell people what the bus times are. And I'm like, people are not getting the bus because they can't get information. They've got that on Google Maps. Like it is not about that. It's about them feeling like it is something for them. And I think it is probably one of the few things you can do to inoculate against misinformation. There's a lot of evidence to suggest you can't undo polarization once it's started, and you have to shift it to a different topic or a different angle. But one of the things you can do to help with misinformation and polarization is get people to identify with the thing that you want them to in the first place. These are the kinds of messages we use a lot. Our county is growing. We all need to get around. Some car journeys need to be swapped out, and more road space means more choice than just driving. So we talk a lot about togetherness and doing it together. And then the messages that we do, we talk about mobility. We talk in a very common sense language. We always try and say that change is possible. We talk a lot about future generations. We talk quite a lot about co-benefits. Realistic. This is one of the things I meant about earlier about it sounding realistic. Is that so the 8 to 80 thing, you know, making streets safe for people to cycle from 8 to 80. We want that, and we absolutely know it's possible. But it sounds, I've been with people who are very kind of normal and mainstream, and they just think it sounds insane. Like they just literally think you're talking about like the 80-year-olds that we see today who had lots and lots of health problems baked in through inactivity, getting on their bikes. And so that's the kind of thing that like I just don't talk about anymore. I want it to happen, but I don't talk about it publicly. Clean air, and always having this kind of like nice voice and tone. So we don't talk about climate change. We really try to not use the word restrictions. I'm really trying to even move away from the word low traffic, because the obvious ending to that is neighborhoods, which are like kind of considered to be polarizing. We don't make it all about bikes, and we don't do too much jargon. I think this should all be kind of relatively obvious to all of you. I definitely link a lot to some things that everyone has experienced. So I link to the difference between the school holidays and the term time traffic, because everybody in Oxford knows what that's like. And they go, oh my God, the traffic is so much better now that schools are out. And so I'm like, well, yes. So imagine what it's going to be like when you add 15% more traffic to what the term, you know, in school time is like. And then people go, oh, wow, oh, really? Why is that going to happen? And they go, because the population is growing. And then you've got people. It's the only thing that I've found that's landed. We've got a new website. You're very welcome to go and have a look at it, but we try and make it really simple with all these stories. Feel free to like steal stuff, take things with them. And so our tactics have been to very much go to the middle. So our aim is to stop protest votes in May 25, which is one of the ways that we see the scheme being vulnerable, and also make sure that people have some understanding of the scheme enough that politicians feel like it's feasible to keep going with it. So we've decided to go to workplaces because we want to create that informed understanding. And we've gone to the largest employers, we get the senior level buy-in, and we do presentations. So it's, again, one of the things that sort of fits my skill set is that also going and doing really like ordinary presentations up. These are the traffic filters, this is what's going to happen, and people being able to ask questions. So it's that informed understanding. And we make them like very, very practical, and we tell people how they could get around instead and how they could do different things. But we also have lots and lots of messages about the benefits of a low traffic city in there, but we don't start with those, but they're constantly throughout it. There's a little bit on social media that I'm going to talk about very, very briefly. We really haven't got it right. I would say that's one of the things in my first year that I really regret. We did relinquish the space too much, and partly because I just hate social media, and it does matter. So the people who are like your sort of scrollers who just look through, they think that everybody hates the LTN because they only see the loudest voices. And so we're trying to change that now, and I'm trying to raise a lot more money so we can do something about that. But it does matter, and I wish we hadn't relinquished it quite so much. But if you do want some really practical advice, positive or neutral comments are definitely the best. Use loads of pictures and images, and be really, really aware of not repeating negative frames. So it's really hard not to, but like I found myself to a journalist the other day saying, not everyone hates the LTNs. And what you should say is like, some people love them, some people not so much. But the negative frame is, of course, when Nixon said, I'm not a crook, he should have said, I am an honest man, because everyone hears, I am a crook. And if you have people who are willing to go in and do that kind of positive commentary and not going to get patronising or aggressive, then do nurture them. But sometimes you just can't stop people. I've got a few in Oxford who, yeah. And then I'll flick through the media attention because I think I'm over time, but I will come back to it if there's people in the comments who want me to. And then finally, I would just say, remember what you've got control over and what you don't have control over. So we do not have control over the national picture. We do not have control over the tech or the infrastructure that once it's decided. We don't have control over things like this bridge got closed in Oxford and it's thrown the whole thing out for 2 years. And we don't have control over the Office of Resource, which I think is a real bottleneck. But we do have influence over people who are good, feeling supported, and the elections, and public understanding and adapting the journey. So getting people kind of used to it. And finally, just remember, it is a long old road. Do look after yourself. Like, it has been really like an absolute baptism of fire for me. And I really haven't done all of the things. Like, I could have worked every single weekend and every single night, and I haven't. And this is my favourite spot down in Cornwall, at the Helford River Estuary. And if you are ever in that area, it is most definitely worth a visit. So I always remember this spot when I'm in the kind of middle of like some horrific conspiracy theory thing. And that's all. Thank you.
Brilliant. Brilliant. Thanks, Sahara. I really love that slide with the explaining the traffic. I spent probably the best part of 2 decades trying to explain the impact that even just a few percentage points might have, and I don't think I've ever done it as succinctly as that. So yeah, brilliant. I might nick that if that's fine. Okay, excellent. Thank you so much. We've had a few questions coming in, but before I go to that, sorry, actually, one thing was around sharing slides. I think you've all said that you're happy with that. Yeah, good. I think a lot of it's available on various websites anyhow, but we will make those available to people that have registered. Okay, so some reflections on that from our panel. First of all, I'll turn to Roger Harrabin, who's a former BBC Energy and Environment analyst. Who would be well known to many of you. He's covered many major general news stories in this space. He's also an honorary fellow of St Catherine's College in Cambridge and a visiting fellow of the Green Templeton College in Oxford, so particularly well placed maybe to respond to this one. An associate press fellow at Wolfson College, Cambridge, and has received an honorary doctorate of science from Cranfield University. And most importantly, of course, Roger, you're also a FIT fellow. So, you know, I make that as a positive compliment on you more generally. Yeah, please offer some thoughts on what you've just heard there and any other insight that you think is relevant and useful for those on the call.
Okay, so just a quickie. When I try to explain to people about traffic, I think the easiest thing to do is to get a beaker, a scientific beaker with measurement marks on it, fill it to the brim, and then just put in an extra 15% and see what happens. It's really very effective. Anyway,
Like that.
That's a tiny issue. I have to say, I've just been blown away by these presentations. As you know, I wrote a paper for FIT, which I hope is now publicly available, looking at some of the outcomes from various places, including these two. But I'm absolutely staggered at the depth and complexity and intelligence you are operating on here. Is just fantastic, and you all deserve to win. Everything. And I just flipped through. I mean, I have so many things to say. I just flipped through a few of them. So, Sarah, yeah, I really like the emphasis on the positive benefit for families. I think that's a winner wherever you are, really. I loved the idea of the right to live car-free. I think it's an interesting one, and you know, a lot of the time, the people who are campaigning on this agenda slip into a very kind of nerdy, practical, on the streets way of operating, but actually keeping some deep philosophies is really helpful as well. So if you think about, I would say, you know, if you look back in 100 years' time and you see old videos of people driving around in 3-ton vehicles and endangering cyclists and killing children and what have you, you will think that we were absolutely mad back then. And I think, you know, trying to reframe the philosophy of it is actually quite helpful, and would be very helpful now around the debate over SUVs and SUV size. I don't know whether you're going to get connected into that or not, but that seems to me to be really big, that SUVs have increased in size by 30%. In the meantime, engines have become more efficient by 30%, thereby cancelling out any advantage on more efficient motors. And I'm very keen that we don't slip into the idea that electric cars are going to be the panacea, because they clearly are not, from point of view of congestion and economy and safety, and also from use of resources for batteries and what have you. So I don't know if that's going to come up at all. The Oxford one, I mean, crikey, I mean, I have no idea how you were across so many agendas here. It really is quite extraordinary. And you've been caught up in this terrible battle zone of polarization where you've been held up as the sort of deniers of liberty by people just telling lies. And unfortunately, we can now see that you can get away with telling lies. We had a prime minister who did it for several years, and it kind of doesn't matter. All that matters is that you win. And it's awful what's happening with this agenda. It's terrible what's happening with the climate change agenda, with a really cynical prime minister trying to grub up votes by pretending to disavow climate policies, whereas actually the policies are almost exactly the same. It's just that the gloss has changed too. We've got to be more cautious and not harm people. So what else? Yeah, I really like the idea about storytelling. That's the main thing that came out from my report that I did, to try to find ways of telling stories. The workplace, I don't know if you've used the example of the Nottingham workplace levy or not, but I was reporting on that at the time, and there were a lot of cities who were considering the workplace levy, and all of them except for Nottingham got frightened off by their business lobby saying this will harm city centre businesses. And Nottingham had the balls to go ahead with it. And they did a review 10 years later, and basically everything's fantastic. And they've used it massively to subsidise public transport and create more public transport investment. So it is just a question, it is just a question of having the nerve to see it through and wait for the sunlit uplands on the far side. But, councillors are human. Councillors don't want to get sacked. Council officers don't want to have the heat put on them. So it's damn difficult. One final thought. I mean, I've had a load more thoughts, but one final thing just to mention now is I can see that you, Zahura, have been to so many different sorts of organisations lobbying support. I just wondered on a broader scale if FIT could do something about training of planners. So there might be an online course to be done. You might be able to get into schools of planning. You might be worth you approaching the RTPA and kind of start from scratch. They might have you actually on a formal curriculum. That would be the ideal thing, to have you on a curriculum. And if not, to offer some online training or to go along and do talks. A few thoughts. Anyway, I just want to offer my congratulations to you guys. It's just absolutely fantastic. I take my hat off to you.
Brilliant. Thank you, Roger. And yeah, I completely agree. There's sort of the quantity and the quality of the information that we've just been provided in the last 50 minutes is really quite exceptional. So we're quite lucky, I think, to have had that insight. I know that, just on that last point there, I know that the foundation has reached out to a number of professional organisations, including Transport Planning Society, which I was chair of up until the beginning of this year, to try and sort of build that idea of how we influence traffic moving forward and transport planning more generally. I think it's fair to say, actually, a lot of the sort of professional organisations are highly in favour of this agenda, because once confronted with the facts, and as you put, the beaker is pretty straightforward, and Sahara's example of the traffic in term time and what goes forward is equally so. So there's a desire to manage rather than forever expand and embed the sort of inequalities that the current system's got. The issue is how the technical rubs up against the political. And I do think actually what we've heard today is the bridge between those two things, isn't it? As you were saying, Roger, it's all about having the discipline to stick with it and go with it. But it's actually hearing the positive messages, and dare I say it, the cake from Sahara that gives people the stamina of the political decision makers to kick with it. Okay.
Let me just come in there, because I was interested in the cake. So, you said you had bad relations with the media. Did you try to get them to pick up a picture of your cake? Because
no. Okay. Well, I would have not wanted them to do that, because I wouldn't wanted them to know that we were so in bed with the councillors. So, but maybe that was the wrong call. Maybe I should have. That would have made a great story, and
Yeah, it's just
Anything
a wit. I mean, I really like the wit of the cake, and any witty stuff helps you round
True.
the thorny path of normal argy-bargy. And you know, I could see that in the paper. And
Take the idea in like the
graphic.
cake in the town centre with people telling people that actually 1 in 2 people are in favour, or we could do a cake in. Yeah, no, that's a really good point. At the time,
It's not too late. You could
no.
stage it, and you don't have to stage it in a sense that it was being angled at the council. You could, you could take the paper a cake and say, look, have a look at this, and give it to the editor.
Yes, that's a very, very good point. Yeah. I
mean, we talked about this when we were chatting yesterday, didn't we? About the importance of essentially just being nice and good manners, because often the people that are involved in these processes, really, that's a rarity, right? I mean, that you don't find that. So that makes a huge difference. And wit and humour go a long way, I find, in this space. Okay, sorry, Rebecca, you've been very patient. Let me introduce you and then we'll take your reflection. So Rebecca is Professor of Energy and Climate Governance at Lancaster Environment Centre, where she leads the Climate Citizens Project. In 2000, she was an expert lead for the Climate Assembly UK, the Citizens Assembly established by the UK Parliament. Sorry, not 2000, 2020. I was going to say that was a bit too long ago. Rebecca is an advisor to the National Lottery's Climate Action Fund, and she also features on Women's Hour, Our Planet Power List, which highlights 30 women making an impact by helping to protect our planet. She's also written a book, Too Hot to Handle, about the democratic challenge of climate change, which is published by Bristol University Press in March 2020. Very timely. Rebecca, please offer your reflections.
Thank you, Mark, and really pleased to be here. And like Roger, absolutely blown away to see the descriptions of both the campaigns. I am not a campaigner, and I'm sort of eternally fascinated by the both the strategy and, frankly, the logistics of campaigning whenever I talk to campaigners. So really, really interesting to hear. Thank you. And I wanted to sort of set what you were saying in a bit of a wider context about developing a social mandate and a political mandate for climate action, and something about polarization, something about fairness, and something about who's opposing. Because I think if I had to sum up what you were doing, it would be that you were making absolutely heroic efforts in really difficult circumstances, not of your own making. The place to start on this for me is that there is no net zero scenario which does not involve a reduction in car use, and that's not a campaign, that's not a campaign message. That is a scientific message from the CCC, more widely from the IPCC at a global perspective, and actually quietly, I think, in DFT scenarios, as far as I understand it, not in the political debate, but that's a different matter. So, you are basically helping to implement what has already been agreed at that very top level, that that reductions in car miles are a really important part of this agenda, and promotion of active travel. The problem is, I think that the way that active travel measures have been introduced is through this sort of yes/no binary, and I think that the introduction of traffic, of low traffic neighbourhoods and that sort of thing during COVID, or as a response to COVID, given the absolutely zero consultation time offered to local authorities to get the money out, was really, really counterproductive. I think the trick here, and it's not necessarily a trick that's in your gift to do, is to not start with that yes/no question. So we had a similar thing over. We've always had a similar thing over renewables. For example, the siting of onshore wind. If you go into a community and say, "Do you want these turbines here? Yes or no?" you're going to have polarization, right? Centre for Sustainable Energy have done some really interesting work on local energy planning, where they actually go into a community and say, okay, this is how much energy you use, this is the potential, this is the potential of this area for renewables generation. Let's have a collective chat about how we can meet our energy needs. And I've been to those meetings, and honestly, it is a changed atmosphere in the room. So you get someone coming in who's like, I really hate wind turbines, and then once they're drawn into that discussion about energy futures, it's a very, very different tone. I don't know. I mean, that's a role for local authorities, isn't it? To actually, start with a sort of general question about how do we achieve the transport aims for this area, and that gives everyone much more of a sort of a much more of a positive starting point for the campaigners to then say what they think is the response to that. And frankly, the onus should be on the what you might call the sort of pro-car lobby to prove their case. And in fact, the opposite's happened, where you guys have had to come in on the back foot. And the reason that the pro-car case need to prove their case is that, goes back to the scenarios showing that we do need a reduction in car miles. So if you do try and reduce that polarization, and Zara, I was really, I was tantalized by one of the slides that you skipped over, which I think showed the point that you will always have strong views either side, but a big group in the middle that are undecided. And that is pretty conclusive evidence. On climate, actually, you have very, very strong concern about climate and generalized support for climate action. But that doesn't, and so you sort of have almost a sort of predetermined pro-climate feel, but that's quickly eroded if you throw people straight into a binary. Yeah. So it is about working with those people in the middle who are generally worried about climate, but don't necessarily feel like active citizens on climate. Which is why I think the issues around fairness are absolutely crucial. And I was really interested as well that both of you emphasised sort of language and messaging, because I think the climate movement generally does tend to fall into a messaging about sort of, solidarity, about justice, which we know politically doesn't appeal to everyone. It's more, crudely, it's more a left message than a right message. It's more a city message than it is a rural message. And it's more a young message than an older people message. So I think the climate community naturally falls into that, and we have to try and very consciously reflect people's wider conceptions of fairness. So it's partly a language point, but I think also that the transport debate is dominated by cities, and we need to think about people who have a genuine case to be currently car dependent. I live in a rural area, and it's very, very different from the city. So I think an awareness of that is really important. I imagine as well that you have sort of rural and suburban hinterlands who probably have for whom that the city is important as a destination, but they are probably car dependent. So I think there's a lot of work to be done there, and I have a colleague in my research group who is looking at climate views of rural voters, and particularly sort of right-leaning rural voters, and I think that's a really, really crucial demographic. They're not necessarily opposed to the things we suggest, but you would craft a message for them in a very different way. And I'm sure but in case anyone on the call isn't aware of Britain Talks climate segmentation, that's a really useful kind of handy guide. I'll put it in the chat, but that's a really useful sort of handy guide for thinking about communicating on climate. And the final thing I would say is that I think we need to be very explicit and talk openly about the funding and the influence for sort of anti-net zero messaging. So there's something else which I'll put in the chat about discourses of delay, basically the tactics which people opposing net zero type policies will use. And one of them is just increasing complexity, just throwing extra facts into the mix, which you then have to, qualify or try and debunk, and that so it becomes a sort of war of information. And that's really problematic. And sometimes I think there's a real need to sort of step back from that and say, you know, these are the facts. This is what we need to do to achieve our net zero targets, and sort of push them back onto the territory of, do you want to take action on climate or not? And stop sort of arguing. So, I mean, I've been very involved in the case of the Cumbria coal mine, and the evidence that people want to throw into the mix to try and justify opening another site of fossil fuel extraction. I mean, and that deliberate complexity that's added into what is a very simple argument is absolutely mind-blowing, and that's very deliberate. So I think we need to be very upfront about confronting you know, high carbon economic interests, and not necessarily as part of a campaign, but in the wider discourse, and certainly with politicians that we're working with, just so that they're aware of the you know, of the circumstances within which these kinds of debates are playing out. So I'll put links to those in the chat to share with everyone on the call. But I mean, you know, more power to your elbow.
Brilliant. Thank you, Rebecca. I mean, I think your point about fairness actually is really key, and you know, this is an area that is, I think, can be quite difficult for environmental movements, because often the sort of go-to solution is, well, let's pay more for the more polluting, and that then, if that is not done in a sort of sensitive and progressive way, can feel quite regressive, and that's what I think you've seen in places like London with ULEZ and the like. I just wonder, and there was a comment I think in the chat as well from Joe Sargent about communication. So I think perhaps particularly here over LTNs, but it could be anything actually, needs to cut through the class barrier. Roxanne, Sarah, did you have any thoughts on that? Was that something that you kind of tussled with a little bit in Cambridge? And then I'll come to you, Sahara.
It definitely did, and I mean, this happens a lot around cycling as well. Is, well, only people who can afford only rich people who can afford carbon fiber bikes cycle, or well, if you're cycling, you know, get a job and get a car. So it's like, well, you know, who cycles? I think in Cambridge we're further ahead perhaps in a lot of places in just how many people do cycle, but this messaging, these tropes still come out, and the cycling campaign, and I think somewhat fairly, is very much seen as middle class, and I think that very much transferred onto the Sustainable Travel Alliance. But I think then Sarah can talk to the work we really did, particularly around bus users, to really try and break through this. And I think was always in our mind is, we shouldn't be saying this is what people should be doing. We should be saying, are you listening to these people? Are you talking to them? Because they're going unheard. These are people who are too busy to engage with your consultation, or don't even know about it. How are you going to them? And that's where we tried to do. So Sarah.
Yeah, we did an enormous piece of work last summer. We did a survey of bus users, not only in Cambridge, but we also went out to Ely and Huntingdon, so neighbouring towns, and we asked bus users why they used the bus, how they found their local bus service, and we also asked them whether they had heard about the Making Connections proposals and listened to the consultation. This was really useful because it allowed us to highlight quite how dependent on bus services bus users were. I can't remember the exact statistic off the top of my head, but if you look in the news section of our website, there's the results of the bus survey. But our bus users were absolutely and utterly dependent on the bus. They didn't own a car. We asked them whether they owned cars, and we asked them what their major form of transport, and we asked them how often they used the bus. And these people using the buses were very unlikely to have a car. They didn't have anything else to fall back on, and they used the bus multiple times a week. So we therefore we're highlighting that these people really don't have a choice, and they need to use the bus. We in relation to the Making Connections consultation, we asked bus users whether they had heard of the Making Connections consultation. A large proportion of them had heard of the road charge element. I think only about 16% had heard about the bus aspects of the proposals. So I think this really brought home this problem of communication. So in raising problems with the middle class nature of those supporting the proposals, people weren't thinking about the bus users and their needs, and many of the people who really needed these proposals weren't aware of them either and hadn't engaged in the survey.
Yeah, I think, yeah, that's really interesting. And I can see, actually, I think it's Indigo 06 has been said, actually telling people how to live their lives is difficult, but giving, as Roxanne, you saying, and giving the information about the people that aren't engaging in this discussion, what they need, what they're not, those people that aren't being heard, I think is a really useful way of sort of pushing that voice into the decision-making process.
Sorry to quickly add, Mark, I just want to say that we did that on a shoestring. We were able to do that. The local authority with all their budget, and I know we should be positive, but I'm quite scathing that they didn't manage to do that. And I think we showed them up, and I hope that it pushes for better consultation in future. Sorry. No,
I mean, I think that's a good point. And as I think Sahara, you were saying, local authorities aren't really very well adapted for this world. It's a relatively, it's very different to what way that things went sort of 10, 15, 20 years ago. And that the ability for local authorities to innovate in this space, I think, is difficult, mainly because they're so concerned because, well, we did it this way before. And if we go off that way, then, we're doing something different. Why are we doing that? Is that challengeable?
It's not an excuse. I mean, I think there are reasons why it's hard for them, but they absolutely should be getting, like, rural bus users to fill out consultations. Like, that feels well and truly well within their remit. I think the thing that they are really do struggle with is like the polarization on social media and the messaging, the narrative. It's just like they don't have it in their bones. Like, it's just very, very different from like their institutional culture. Like, they don't have the expertise. They've never had to do it before. Like, a lot of the comms team are kind of talking about this as if it's explaining like the bin day is changing, and I'm like, no, this is going to be a very, very major shift for like a lot of people's lives. And so, but yeah, on some things they absolutely, like, getting those bus users in rural areas, they should be doing that kind of stuff. No, my thoughts were about on fairness was, as well as making sure that you include the people who are really disengaged and like really poor and who really rely on buses and who are that's a very important thing. But at the same time, I think there's two things. One is really important to remember that it is unfair. Like, poverty is like difficult by definition. If you have less resources, you have less ability to adapt. And I think we shouldn't be afraid to admit that in the like groups that we are in. And I think sometimes I see too much of the pros being like, well, absolutely, people can just get on a bike, or they can, or being kind of sneering or patronizing. And it really makes me cringe because, if you don't have bike parking and you don't have anywhere to live and you live in a block of flats and or you've got health inequalities already baked in, etc., etc. And I think the danger in not admitting that and not talking about that is that you throw the baby out with the bathwater. And I think that, for example, I would say with the LTNs in Oxford, they were not implemented well. Like, there is no planet on which you could argue that they were implemented well. And I do have real equality concerns with some particular groups of people with the LTNs. But the point is that the general direction is absolutely equitable and absolutely fair, and the richest drive further than fathers, and all of that. And so if we don't admit when we have made mistakes, then I fear that the whole thing gets chucked out.
I think that's absolutely key, and I think that being able to give elected members and decision makers the cover to be able to admit they've made mistakes without then pulling apart the entire edifice that you're pushing in, because that's always the concern. As soon as we back down on one thing, we end up pulling out everything, and actually giving people that sort of safe space to be able to say, yeah, hold hands up on that one, that didn't work, I think is really valuable and quite unusual, actually.
But also putting the onus on, people do get defensive, certainly about their car use. But the majority of people absolutely can reduce their journeys in some ways. And absolutely, in Oxford, we've got a phenomenal amount of resources that people can draw on that they're just not. And so that's why I think with the traffic filters, people keep saying, oh, should we incentivize the buses? Should we do this? And I'm like, well, the filters are going to massively incentivize them because you're not going to be able to drive. And so drawing attention to the equality element of the filters, everyone has 100 passes, they're all free, like, is really, and people care about, but remembering that people care about procedural fairness and they care about outcome fairness. So they might not like the way it's being done, they might feel like aggrieved in that way, but they actually might benefit from it. So also having to remember that with your messaging, that even a bus user may disagree with them because they may not feel not listened to, even though their buttons speed up. So it's so complex, and it's really hard to tailor your messages in like all these different ways, but just trying to be as aware as possible about those when you're talking to different audiences.
Yeah, and I think having a clear, consistent message that's agreed across multiple partners that you then that you deliver authentically over time, I think that that's where you can my experience is you can build a lot of trust with that. Just before we leave the theme of fairness, I've got some nuts and bolts campaigny stuff that I'd like to throw at you, if that's okay. Roger, did you want to offer any reflections on the fairness piece in particular?
I don't know how many people on the call are old enough to remember Professor John Adams from University College London, but his very, very useful phrase about people who don't drive is there are people who don't drive because they are too old, too young, too sick, too scared, or too poor. Now that's a lot of categories you're ticking. And when people say, oh, this is a middle class fad, I mean, that is not a middle class argument. And I think a very, very useful one. So too old, too young, too sick, too scared, too poor. I mean, nobody thinks about too scared, but actually there's a lot of people who are too scared to drive. I haven't driven a car for 6 years now. I got in one the other day. It was bloody terrifying. I could kill somebody in this.
I know, I feel the same way. I avoid whenever I can. But yeah, that's a big constituency, as you say, Roger. And yeah, we need to be able to highlight
it's
that.
not just a big constituency to aim for support from. It's a big constituency to brandish over the heads of people who are naysayers.
Yeah. Yeah. Okay. Final thought on that, Rebecca, and then I want to go to some nuts and bolts campaign just in the final sort of 5-10 minutes.
I think I agree with that on fairness, but I think that, we do a lot of public dialogues, very detailed conversations with people, and there's fairness expressed as concern for vulnerable groups, including a lot of the groups that you mentioned, Roger, but also a different conception of fairness, which is one that's really important politically, which is about fairness for, well, you hear this in politics all the time, hardworking families or the squeeze middle or the just about managing, whatever you call it. But it is essentially fairness for people who are seen to be making their contribution to society, just about making a living, probably do have a car or aspire to having a car, but it wouldn't take much to to sort of unsettle that balance. And that is a really important group politically, and it is different from the kind of normally people seen as vulnerable groups, as in people in energy poverty, transport poverty, or on benefits. So I think it's super important not to do anything that demonizes that group, because they're a bit of a cipher. I would never suggest that people don't focus on the needs of vulnerable groups, but I think that is sometimes not what people are getting at when they talk about fairness. In fact, our research is very clear on that.
No, and I think that came out in the ULEZ debate in London, in the sense that, obviously the poorest families don't have cars, they're not impacted by it. But it was that group that you just described there, Rebecca, that were being impacted, because they were the ones that had the old motors that were being, perhaps disproportionately hit by the policy. Okay, so we've had a few questions in the chat, and I had a couple of questions, and I wanted to do two things. Both of you mentioned polling as being really, really important as part of their argument. Any tips or advice on how to get the best out of that, out of a poll, how to go about commissioning it, and maybe perhaps particularly for Sarah and Roxanne, working with Fusion Media, you mentioned a couple of times, which I assume is like a sort of advertising or campaigns organization. Can you just offer just a little bit of advice about that for people that may be going into that space for the first time?
Can I start with the agency, because that then led to the polling? So because we had no time at all, we had to hit the ground running. So we reached out to an agency, and particularly because at this time it was sort of Cam cycle getting the ball rolling before we had the alliance going, Sarah fully in place. So that was why we reached out to an agency. But that still takes time, and we still had a limited budget. So you can go to an agency, they can sort of get you going with an idea, but you're still probably going to have to implement and create your own interpretation and see how quickly you can move. At the speed at which we had to move, you can't go for perfection here. You've got to go on instinct and get going. So it was really helpful to have an agency just spark the campaigning ideas that we didn't have time to think about at that point. But it does take funding as well. So that's
any tips? Any tips for the commissioning of an agency? So managing that relationship, any sort of key learnings from that?
So let's say that there was a existing relationship with key stakeholders and we had a strong idea that they would get it. They've done campaigns like Bike is Best and other things. So we did not have time to do a tender and review lots. So we had to go on, we know this is an agency that supports what's going on here. We know they get it. And they've done successful campaigns in this space. So, we had to, and they are willing to run very quickly in a slightly chaotic ad hoc way. We were like, oh my God, this thing's coming and we don't quite know what's going on yet. We don't know the messaging. We don't know the budget. Just, they supported what was going on enough to be willing to jump in and do that. And I don't know that most agencies would necessarily be able to do that. So be very upfront about the level of potential chaos you've got around you if you're engaging in that way. But also, we had some good skills within our own team to take that and run with it. There's no point spending all that money on commissioning something if you can't then go and implement it as well. They also supported us with the poll because we hadn't done a YouGov poll before, so they were helpful in doing that. Sarah, do you want to elaborate any more on the polling parts?
I think that needs to be over to you, Roxanne. That was
it was so much that it's hard. I was saying to Mark, I sort of put it all in a box and I can't quite put all the things in the right order now of what happened because it was so intense. So yeah, I remember that with the poll, we struggled to be able to get the level of granularity that we would have really wanted to support our campaign. If you're in a bigger city, that will be much easier. So there are certain cities where you can get enough demographic sampling of different demographics to say something. So for example, we couldn't quite hone in as much as we would have liked on young people or certain other demographics. So we had to think of our questions in line with, well, what's the level of detail we're actually going to get? Therefore, you've got to think about what's the campaigning message going to be. That said, YouGov polls can't just be run to support your campaign. They have to be fair and you might not like the results, but that's what they are. It is a properly run polling, but you've just still got to think about, well, what is the data point that's actually going to make an impact when it comes out, and accept that maybe it's not the point you want. But I think we were bang on with our instincts about where this went. I hope that helps.
Zahara, do you want to offer in?
Yeah, we just commissioned YouGov and they have got this panel and we were able to sort of say which questions we wanted. We had questions and they wouldn't let us quite do it like that. They changed it slightly, but we were able to make it very slightly more kind of the question very slightly more favorable, but they were strict on making sure it was like a genuinely like accurate polling question. What I would say is that you could use the poll. I'm just thinking about that thing about turning it from like a binary into how would you like to solve this problem? Because the obvious thing is like, well, I'd love to do a citizens assembly and have like 100 people from Oxford and have £250,000 and do it. But if you don't have that, so I wonder if you could do a poll instead of like support oppose different measures. I don't know if this would be possible, but it would be really interesting to put a set of measures to people and ask them to rank them or something like that. And it would just be interesting to do it in that way rather than that binary. But that binary, if it is in your favour, is very much latched onto and it's very easy to understand. So that 2-to-1 in favour was just so helpful for us. Really I remember when we opened the polling thing, we were like, we opened it, we were like, oh my God. And so we did not know it was going to be like that. And I assumed that the other side, like Reconnecting Oxford, our sort of our nemesis, I presume they have done their own polling and are just not releasing it. I don't know. I would guess they have. So they've definitely got to do it.
Okay, we could. I mean, I've got another 10 questions or more. I'm sure Rebecca and Roger could also offer more, but unfortunately, we are up our time. So I really want to thank all of you, both for today, but also for all your hard work over the last few years. It's really fabulous to see. And certainly, if I was in Oxford or Cambridge, I would really welcome, I think, working with diligent people like yourselves, because it does. Not only does it make your life a bit easier, but it makes it a bit more pleasant as well. And I really can't stress how important that is. Thank you, Rebecca and Roger, for excellent reflections. Yeah, brilliant as always to get your insight on this debate. We will have more of these, not least because FIT continues to fund a very large number of causes and organisations. I don't think we actually have one planned as yet. Pausing momentarily to see if one comes up. Oh, 13th of Feb. Okay, all right. There is one, so we'll put that in the chat if Brogan hasn't already put it in. And we look forward to. Oh yes, so one about Roger French talking about the successful bus operation. Yes, brilliant. Okay, fab. Yeah, no, that's in my diary. I'm looking forward to that. Roger is very entertaining on that topic. Yeah, we will look forward to seeing you there, and if not, at future events. And best of luck. Enjoy your lunch if you haven't already had it on the call. And yeah, goodbye.